First of all, I want to remind you the main points of our previous lecture. We have defined the subject of our talk, which is Hebrew medieval manuscripts. We emphasized the importance of the Petersburg collections for the development of Hebrew codicology and paleography. The story of the formation of Flokovic's first collection was told. I told you about the falsification of manuscripts, and I demonstrated you the techniques of falsification, the use of the glue and changing the dates. Several of the most famous biblical codices, the Babylonian Codex and the Leningrad Codex, were described. On the example of the Karasubazar Geniza, the methods of Flokovic's seizure of manuscripts from Jews of the Crimea were shown. We stopped at the fact that in 1862, Flokovic sold his collection to the Imperial Public Library. In 1863, the Karaites were equalized in civil rights with the Christian population of Russian Empire. In other words, the ideological program was completely fulfilled. The Crimean Karaites essentially became a separate people and gradually came to believe in it themselves. Let's show the picture number 1, please. Let's see the picture number 1. Yes, we know only 2 portraits of Avram Flokovic. The first one I showed you in the first lecture. This is just the very famous portrait of him, and I wanted to be with us a little bit. So today we will continue to collect the manuscripts together with Flokovic. And today we will focus on the significance of the manuscripts he collected for the study of Samaritan culture, for the study of the Jewish religious law, halakhah, for the medieval liturgy in Hebrew, and if we have time, for the Jewish Khazarian history. Gathering of the second collection. The Near East was an unquestionable spiritual center of the Jewish civilization, where the bulk of the Jewish population lived in the early Middle Ages. It was there that the main body of the books that shaped Jewish culture was created over the centuries. It was there that the old Hebrew manuscripts found by Flokovic in the Crimea had been produced. And it was there that the rest of the treasures had to be looked for. Therefore, right after he had sold his manuscripts to the public library, Flokovic started preparations for his travel to the Near East. Of course, it was impossible to get an open list from the government for the territory of Ottoman Empire. But he got a lot of recommendation letters from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and from the Karaite community. In the autumn of 1863, the 76-year-old collector started his fabulous travel to the Near East, where he succeeded in putting together in 18 months' time from the autumn of 1863 to the spring of 1865, an even more important collection than what he had collected over all the previous decades. He departs on his journey with his wife Hannah, his son Zerachia, and his grandson Samuel, who becomes his right-hand man. Here is his itinerary: Odessa, Istanbul, Jerusalem via the port of Jaffa, Aleppo, Jerusalem, Cairo, Jerusalem, Cairo, Damascus, Jerusalem, Odessa. In Aleppo, Flokovic sees the Aleppo Codex. This is the famous codex of the Bible used by Moshe ben Maimon. Today it is kept in Jerusalem. Unfortunately, it is defective today and the text of the Pentateuch is almost entirely missing. He makes a description of the codex and copies its colophon. In Aleppo, he also buys manuscripts. From Aleppo, he comes back to Jerusalem. He is staying in Jerusalem for 5 months and waiting for money from his son-in-law, Gabriel. This is important to emphasize. The library paid the sum in installments to his son-in-law in St. Petersburg. The son-in-law was in no hurry to send money to the Middle East, so Flokovic often found himself short of money. As you know his character, you can understand that he is not staying inactive. He buys manuscripts. For example, he meets a famous book dealer and traveler, Yaakov Sapir, who has just returned from Yemen. And I think that the manuscripts from Yemen that are in the Flokovic collection were purchased from Yaakov Sapir. An important episode in Flokovic's stay in Jerusalem was his acquisition of manuscript from the Karaite community of the town of Heyday in Babylonia. Flokovic never got there himself, but he managed to establish connections with the community and to receive, in exchange for modern prayer books and several printed editions of the Bible, useless antiquities. Just a short remark. We have to understand that at that time, old books were not a real treasure for those people. Modern editions seemed to them much more valuable. Flokovic invented and worked out his own new plan, how for getting manuscripts without support of government. The plan was the following one. First step, he contacts certain members of the community who were ready for collaboration. He bribes them slightly and asks them to bring him some old manuscripts for research, and he asks them if they have a geniza in their synagogue. Second step, he visits the community, prays with the people, and builds good relationship with the community leaders. Third step, he offers them paying for the reconstruction of their old synagogue. He declares his respect to the community and his main motivation and asks for it just a small compensation, old and useless books and fragments. As a rule, they were ready to accept his offers, especially when accompanied with a modest bakshish bribe. The last step, he pays for destruction of the old building that cost almost nothing and takes geniza materials. And when He was very lucky he got also the community archive and the library. And if you understand his personality, he never paid for the renovation of the ruined building. He used to disappear soon after his raid. He approbated it firstly on Samaritans. The acquisition of the Samaritan collection was the main achievement of Firkovich at that period. As you know, the Samaritans are a small sect that recognized only the law of the Torah. That is if the Karaites are the sons of the Bible, then Samaritans are the sons of the Pentateuch, Bnei HaTorah. The Samaritans used the ancient Hebrew alphabet, which was in common use before the Babylonian captivity. It's 6th century before Common Era. Today it is called Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. After returning to their homeland, Jews became to use the Aramaic alphabet that we know today. Please, illustration number 2. Let this follow be an example of Samaritan writing. Here is a fragment from the book of Genesis in 3 languages, Hebrew, Samaritan, and Arabic, in Samaritan script. Sons of the Pentateuch lived in Shechem, Nablus, Palestinian autonomy of today, in a very isolated settlement. Samaritans have their own rich literature that was completely unknown to researchers. The Samaritan Pentateuch is the most important source for studying the formation of the core of Torah text. So Firkovich meets some Samaritans in Jerusalem, who secretly sold him some manuscripts. After that, he comes to the city of Shechem for 2 weeks in April 1864, and during this short stay, builds bridges with the heads of the community, and comes to the agreement with the high priest. He donates money for the reconstruction of the old synagogue. They give him the contents of the Geniza. He waits for the first step, I mean demolition of the old building, and brings the materials to Jerusalem. Of course, he can't read it by himself, but he is clever enough to understand its value. The collection contains a lot of papers, a lot of folios in parchment paper in Samaritan, Arabic, and Hebrew languages, and also scrolls and its inscriptions on stone, silk, and copper. In total, 1,350 bibliographical units. Until today, it is the biggest Samaritan collection in the world. Now let's go back to Jerusalem, again to the year 1864. Despite the incredible luck of the acquisition of the Samaritan collection, Firkovich is eager to go to Egypt as soon as possible. He realizes that it is there that the biggest discoveries are waiting for him. In spring, Firkovich finally receives the long-awaited money, pays off his debts, and leaves for Cairo. I would like to remind you that Abraham Firkovich was already 77 years old at that time, and his letters were full of complaints about poor health. Also, Perhaps this is just a literary device common in this genre of that time. I will stop on the most spectacular part of his journey. Flokovic arrived in Cairo in the spring of 1864 with his grandson Samuel, and there he made his most extraordinary discovery. In a matter of weeks, he achieved an incredible results. The leaders of the local Karaite community, in exchange for Flokovic's promise to repair at his own expense the ancient Karaite synagogue of Rabbi Simcha, gave him the full contents of its Geniza, library, and archive. He gets thousands of written issues, incredible luxury, something that no collector could even dream of. He went back to the Holy City for a short period for Passover, and then again left for Cairo. He spent in Cairo several spring and summer months in 1864, doing the examination, preliminary description and classification of the materials obtained, which numbered thousands of manuscripts and fragments of a variety of topics. The Cairo treasures and hundreds of manuscripts acquired during that trip in the other above-mentioned cities were brought together and prepared for dispatch to Russia. His second journey over, Flokovic went back to Russia, carrying with him an unbelievable number of manuscripts. His last years were spent in the Crimea, in the cave town of Chufut-Kaleh, and he was occupied with sorting out his enormous riches. The city was almost empty, with no normal everyday life and with no population. At that time, it was like a dead city with the old man and his old treasures. There were two synagogues, Knesset in Karaite language, in Chufut-Kaleh, and one of them became his private library and a research institute. As I think today, it was a happy period of his life. Pure treasures serve to a pure research purpose. No ideological goals, no falsification, no debates with rabbinical Jews, and no money. No money at all. Flokovic is totally poor because of a wrong investment of his son-in-law Gabriel. He lost all his money. It was in that period that Flokovic published his most famous book, Sefer Avnei Zikaron, Memorial Stones. In a preface to the book, Flokovic described in detail how he gathered his first collection. Avraham, son of Samuel Flokovic, died in his house in Chufut-Kaleh on the 26th of May, 1874, and was buried at the Karaite cemetery. In 1876, his heirs sold his second collection to the Imperial Public Library. Manuscripts were moved to St. Petersburg, and their journey was finished. The total number of Hebrew manuscripts that make up the first and second collections of Avraham Firkovich exceeds about 15,000 items. Firkovich managed to collect the largest private collection of Hebrew manuscripts in the world. The most important part of Firkovich's second collection is the Judeo-Arabic manuscripts. In the period from the 9th to the 12th century, the vast majority of Jews lived in the territories of the Islamic world and spoke Arabic. More precisely, in the language that we call now Judeo-Arabic. This is the Arabic language written in Hebrew alphabet, in which about 10% of the vocabulary is borrowed from Hebrew. As you know, the Jews have many languages. The difference between the Judeo-Arabic language and the rest of them is that it was a language of a full value, the language of the intellectual life of the Jews. Comments on the Bible and the Talmud, books on philosophy, scientific and philological texts, and books of Jewish religious life, law, halakhah, were written in Judeo-Arabic. For example, the greatest Jewish spiritual leader of the Middle Ages, Moshe ben Maimon, wrote all but one of his books, Mishneh Torah, in Judeo-Arabic. Now I would like to show you some specific examples of his collection. Let's start with the halakhah. The Jewish religious law halakhah was finally formed during the period of the Middle Ages, which we are talking about. All major works of halakhah, with the exception of the Shulchan Aruch, were written before 1540. Shulchan Aruch first edition is Venice 1565. However, some extremely important halachic works were unknown to us until the discovery of Firkovich. The most striking example is the writings of the very famous sage, the head of the Babylonian Academy in Surah from the year 998 till his death in 1013, Shlomo ben Hofney. Shlomo ben Hofney was a very prolific author. His halachic writings in Judeo-Arabic language were cited practically all rabbinic authorities of the 11th and 12th centuries. But the works themselves were practically unknown to us before the study of the second collection of Firkovich. His writings are of exceptional importance for understanding the development of halakhah. Today, they are known to us mainly from the manuscripts of Firkovich. Number 3, please. Illustration number 3. Here is a manuscript with several works by Ben Hofney. The names, the titles of the works themselves are listed in the first lines in square letters. There are a book of the commandments, mitzvot, a book on ritual brushes, tzitzis, maybe you can see on the first line, tzitzit, tzitzit, and a treatise of property in Jewish community. Below, you can see the ownership records. The first entry has a date. In the year 1430, according to the era of contracts. It means year 1118 or 1190 of the Common Era. In other words, this manuscript was written before the year 1118. Today, the works of Shmuel Ben Hofney are studied as they are presented in the manuscripts of the Flokovic collection. Secular liturgy. Thank you. An interesting phenomenon in the Jewish medieval culture in the Muslim world, the widest use of the Judeo-Arabic language. However, during the same period, the Jews created the richest secular poetry in Hebrew. This truly great poetry was inspired by examples of Arabic classic poetry and used Arabic prosody, but did not abandon the language of the Bible in favor of the language of the Quran. The heyday of Hebrew poetry, its golden age, is the period of 11th-12th centuries. The heyday of secular lyrics is associated with the names of Shmuel HaNagid, Shlomo ibn Gabbirol, Moshe ibn Ezra, and Yehuda HaLevi. Collections of Jewish secular poetry were formed according to the type of Arabic divans. Divan, it means collection of poets. An important element of any divan was a short summary in prose in Judeo-Arabic language, which preceded each poem. However, secular poetry is not a Bible and not a halachic compendium. Such books were not copied on parchment and were not kept as sacred items. Poems were copied on paper and for practical use. Therefore, there are practically no complete collections of poets of the Golden Age, copied by their contemporaries or around the same era. The poems of almost all the major poets of the Golden Age were in the collection of Flokovic. The study of the works of some of them would be simply impossible without the materials of the Flokovic collection. I want to mention the story of the first great poet Shmuel HaNagid, 993-1056. Shmuel HaNagid was a prominent statesman, the head of all the Jews of Andalusia, and outstanding poet and philanthropist. He can be considered the most successful and famous Jew in Andalusia. He was the only Jewish general of the Middle Ages and maybe until the 20th century. HaNagid was a very prolific poet, writing hundreds of poems, but after his death, they almost completely disappeared. No one has seen them for centuries. Flokovic managed to find his poems and was the first to publish his military lyric in HaKarmel magazine in the year 1870. The second example is the most famous Jewish poet Yehuda Halevi, born before 1075 and died probably in 1141. His poems and letters of the last period of his life, spent in Cairo and Alexandria on the way to the Holy Land, were discovered in Firkovic's collection. It was these letters that explained his delay in Egypt and showed us that the poet has sought different roads by sea and by land to reach the Holy Land. Illustration number 4, please. Maybe to enlarge? Yes, thank you. Here is a fragment from the great collection of Yehuda Halevi. There are the famous songs of Zion. If you see, the beginning is in Judeo-Arabic and Eli Yerushalayim, and after that the short contents of the poem in prose, and this is the starting of the poet. Yefenov mesos tevel kirya lemelech rav lecha nichsefa nafshi miyarketei ma'arav. By the way, if you know this poetry probably from the school or just know it, you may pay attention that in this first line that I citated right now, one word it's not like in a classical version of this poem. Nafshi mipa'atei ma'arav, we know, but in this version of Firkovich, miyarketei ma'arav. It's the same meaning, but in another word. Here is an English translation of this very, very famous and very beautiful poem. And the second one starts, Tzion, halotish ali lishlom asiraich, dorshei shlomcha vehem yeter adaraich. I think it's also very, very famous. Yeah, thank you. Maybe one more just to finish up the English translation. Okay. History. For the oppressed Jews who for many centuries had no state of their own, the story of the powerful Khazars who converted to Judaism was of particular importance. The Khazar kingdom existed from the 7th to the 10th century. On the vast territory of Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and the Crimea. Only a few Hebrew documents related to Khazars have survived. The main document is a correspondence between the 10th century Andalusian grandee Jew Heyday ibn Shaprut and the Khazar king Joseph. This correspondence dates from the about 955. It contains the most valuable information both on the history of Khazars and on the history of the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula. This correspondence is extant in 3 versions. The most complete version was found in the collection of Firkovich. Illustration number 5, please. Here is a fragment of this document This is a beginning of the letter from the king Yosef to Heyday ibn Shaprut. כתב יוסף המלך בן אהרון. This is not this manuscript not from the time of the Khazars. It was copied in Byzantium in probably 13th or maybe 14th century. But still, this is the biggest version of the document and probably the oldest one that we have today. Okay, so I wanted to show you just a little bit about liturgy, history, and halakhah. But I would like to finish our lecture with one more example of the Bible text. This is a very famous manuscript, the famous like Leningrad Codex. And, you know, in the research terms, it's the first Leningrad Bible and the second Leningrad Bible. So this is the first Leningrad Bible. This is the oldest manuscript, oldest dated manuscript of the Pentateuch from the year 928 that Flokovic gathered from Cairo. This is illustration number 6. And this is not only the oldest dated manuscript of the Pentateuch, this is also the oldest illuminated Hebrew manuscript ever. The study of the illumination in Hebrew manuscript culture started from this manuscript. You can see this is a illustration of Ark of the Covenant and its contents. You can see the menorah, okay, in the center. You can see Ark of the Testimony. You can see cherubims like leaves near the Ark of the Testimony. You can see vessel of manna on one side, and other things. It's a very, very famous illustration, but still I think it's really pure beauty. And yes, I would like to finish our talk with this beautiful illustration. And thank you very much for your attention. And if you have questions, please, I am with you.
Thank you very much, Professor Iakerson. And I think with that beautiful picture is really a beautiful way. We have a few questions here. I'll try and gather them up. Bruce wants to know if we have documents.
It's very difficult to hear you. Excuse me, Tamar.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, can't hear me?
Yeah, and slowly, please. Okay.
If we have documents proving the existence of the Jewish kingdom of the Khazars, why has it been described as just a legend? And where?
Okay, it's
Yeah.
very good question. You know, as old we are, we have a lot of questions. We don't show today that it was really a historical fact, and we don't know exactly if all this, you know, correspondence is a liturgy or it's really documentary. But still, the letter from Heyday ibn Shaprut, it's a true letter because we have a teyuta, preparation for it, and it's a lot of information about the life of the Jewish community in Spain at that time. This part is for sure historical part. And concerning to the Khazars, we have a lot of theories and we don't know exactly, but it is probably, yes, that not the whole Khazars, but the, you know, the, how to say, the yard and the nobility of them really got the Judaism as their religion. But it is still, we have no proof facts for it.
Deborah has a question regarding Flokovic's journeys. how do we know all the details? Did he send letters? Did he keep a diary?
Yes, sure. If we are talking about the second, his second journey to the Middle East, we have not only his manuscripts, but we have his archives in the Imperial Library, and in these archives we have a lot of letters with really dates of his journey, so we can reconstruct it on basis of his archives. And we have a lot of people that wrote about him. For example, Samaritans. Until today, if they want to know something about their community, they come to St. Petersburg. And they have a lot of memories about how he did all these things. And we have a lot of complaints from the communities. So it's not such a story.
Okay, another question. How were these manuscripts hidden during World War II, especially during the Nazi siege of Leningrad?
It was a strongly period, Stalin's period of Soviet era. It was a terrible time, but if the simple Russian people miss something about this time, they miss the, how to say, it was a discipline in everything. That it was a discipline in the library also, and all the manuscripts, not only Hebrew, of course, all the manuscripts of the National Library were moved to Siberia for the whole period of the World War, and they came back after the war. No one single manuscript was missed. During the perestroika period, more than 100 manuscripts disappeared. Sure. So the answer is these treasures were not in the city itself. They were in Siberia together with Walter Library and other treasures of the library.
Okay, now a question about Judeo-Arabic. You said that only 10% is Hebrew vocabulary. Does that mean that the rest is Arabic words spelled in Hebrew letters?
Let's say 10 or 15%. It depends on the period, but the rest is the classic Arabic language. Yes.
Okay.
And we see it as a special language, mainly because of the using of Hebrew letters. Because if you use Hebrew letters, it's understandable that it is for use of Jewish people.
Jews, that's true. Is Russia proud of their Jewish connection, or do they view Karaim as a separate sect, not necessarily Jewish?
It is a very good question. We have no Karaites today because Karaites are either in Ukraine or in Lithuania, not in Russia today. In a Soviet period, I can say that they saw Karaites as a separate people, and I knew many, not many, but I personally knew some Jews that were lucky to change their nationality Jew for Karaite and to get possible to come to university, etc., etc. So Karaites were not under the same press like, and if you know probably that during the Second World War in Crimea, Nazis didn't kill Karaites. Karaites proved themselves that they are separate people from the Turkish from the Turkish, how to say, people, and they're not Semitic. They killed in the beginning. They really killed some one community, if I'm not wrong. But after that, they decided that they came to decisions that they are separate. They are not Jews.
Okay. Livia wants to know, what about DNA proof about the Khazars?
I don't believe in DNA proof. I have no idea. Today is very simple. Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay. Continue.
Yeah, I mean, today it's very simple. If you believe you are not Jew, you are not Jew. If you believe you are Jew, you are Jew. With Karaites, it's really like this.
Okay. Dean would like to know how much of the Filkova archive is available on the web. Can people access these things and see them?
I don't think so. I don't
No.
think so. No. I don't think so. Some of manuscripts, no, let's say all the manuscripts of his collection are available in the Institute of Microfilmed Hebrew Manuscripts in Jerusalem. You can come easily and to read every manuscript of his collection. By the way, his collection is not the only collection in St. Petersburg. I just decided to focus on him because he is a really interesting and it is main collection, but not the only one. So to get access to manuscripts, you can get easily in Jerusalem. If they have the archives also with the manuscripts, frankly, I don't know. To get the manuscript archives itself in St. Petersburg, it's not on web. It's you have to come to get permission and to sit down with the documents. But it is possible.
Okay. Quite a few people asked about the book, the Flokovic book. Do you know if it's translated to English? Is it?
No, it's not translated. No? It's written in very interesting Hebrew, very rich Hebrew, like an Hebrew of Maskilim. And I don't think that it was republished, but it is. This book is possible to find in any big library in the United States or in Jerusalem,
okay.
For sure.
Let's see if there's any question we missed here. Could you repeat the name of the poem you brought to Jerusalem?
Which one? The Sons of Zion?
Yeah.
It was, I don't remember. You mean the follower? Mesostevel?
I think that's what, I think the one translated by Robert Meze. Is that the one, the Mesostevel?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Kirya lemelech Rav, yes, it was translated.
Okay. Okay, I think we're gonna end here and invite everyone to join us next week, where the manuscripts aren't going to be necessarily from the St. Petersburg collection, right? But
absolutely, yeah. It was just I want to make it as a journey from the first text that we know today and have today in our hands till the beginning of the print in the end of the 15th century.
Okay. So we'll wait in suspense, and that will be also part of our preparation for Pesach coming up. So thank you for joining us, everybody. Thank you much, Professor Iakerson from St. Petersburg, and we hope to see you soon. Good evening.
Thank you very much again. Thank you. Tiyu Brim. Health to everyone.
Yes, and for those asking, the recording of the session will be sent to you in a few days if you're signed up, and it will also be on the Beit Avichai website. So if people are asking if they can rewatch or invite friends or family, it will be available for you also. Thank you.
Thank you. Great.